Somewhere in southern Italy, a man is watching the night sky. His name is Rocco. He's an atheist, not casually, not by default, by conviction. He's looked at the question and landed somewhere. Nothing. Matter arranged by accident. Meaning is just pattern recognition in a brain that evolved to find patterns. He's made his peace with that. Except he hasn't. Because the sky keeps doing something to him. The sun rises. The arrangement of things. He keeps arriving at a feeling his atheism has no shelf for. That the world isn't just existing, that it's pointing somewhere. So he does something that costs him something to do. He writes a poem and he sends it to the Pope. The poem ends like this. I believe that I don't believe, absolutely certain of nothingness. Yet I still yearn for God. My drama is God. My restlessness is God. That is a man admitting, in public, that his framework has a hole in it. Pope Leo replies, and what he writes is not reassurance. He quotes Augustine, a 4th century philosopher who spent 3 decades running from the very thing he claimed not to believe in. The quote is this: You were within me, but I was outside myself, and there I sought you. Then he goes on to say, the real problem with faith is not believing or not believing in God, but seeking him. The distinction that matters isn't believers and non-believers, it's seekers and non-seekers. He's not telling Rocco the label is wrong, he's telling him the label is beside the point. What matters isn't where you've landed, it's which direction you are facing. But that distinction, seeker and non-seeker, is more uncomfortable than it first sounds, because it raises a question the Pope doesn't answer in that letter. What about the person who looked seriously, with real vigour, with real honesty, and found nothing? Saint Augustine is an interesting figure within the Catholic story, because the shorthand version of his story, Restless Man, Dramatic Conversion, Famous Sentence, doesn't do justice to what his life actually demonstrates. He was embarrassingly, infuriatingly brilliant, and he knew it. Trained in rhetoric, a career success by his late 20s, he had thought hard about the God question and constructed careful, layered reasons for keeping his distance. This was not lazy unbelief. This was a first-rate mind doing what first-rate minds do, building the strongest possible case for the position they've already chosen. He spent nearly a decade inside Manichaeism, a sophisticated religious philosophy that offered him an intellectually respectable alternative to the Christianity his mother kept talking about. When the cracks in that became impossible to ignore, he moved to Neoplatonism, the most refined tradition available to him. And Neoplatonism could get him to the edge of something. It could describe goodness, locate it, argue for it. What it couldn't do was get him across. There was a gap between knowing and being that his intelligence alone couldn't close. The Confessions opens with one sentence addressed directly to God. Our heart is restless until it rests in thee. He's not making an argument, he's making a diagnosis. The restlessness, looking back across 30 years, was always pointing somewhere, even when he was running from it. Especially when he was running. Now, Albert Camus, French writer and philosopher, one of the most honest minds in the 20th century, a man who arrived at almost the exact opposite conclusion from Augustine. Camus looked at the same universe, the same arrangement, the same feeling that things ought to mean something, and concluded that the feeling is real and the meaning is absent. He called this the absurd, the collision between human beings who demand that life makes sense and a universe that offers no such guarantee. His response wasn't despair, it was defiance. Acknowledge the silence, refuse to be crushed, build anyway. Not because there's a foundation, but because building is what humans do. He died in 1960, by every account, a man of profound moral seriousness, generous, courageous, driven by a deep concern for justice and human dignity. The question his life forces you to ask is one the Pope's framework can't comfortably absorb. Is it possible to seek seriously and find nothing? Or does finding meaning mean you stopped too soon? Simone Weil was a French philosopher and died in 1943, aged 34. One of the most serious religious minds of the 20th century, and she spent her entire adult life standing on the threshold of Christianity without ever crossing it. This was not ignorance. She had read the Gospels with complete intellectual seriousness. She had corresponded with Catholic priests and theologians for years. She had moved in circles where faith was not a cultural habit, but a lived, costly commitment. She understood what she was looking for, and she had had experiences she described as direct contact with Christ, not as metaphor, not as feeling of warmth or consolidation, as direct contact. She stayed outside deliberately, renewed year after year, as a considered decision. Her reasoning? She feared that belonging would corrupt her perception, that the warmth and solidarity of a community, the entirely human relief of being somewhere that accepts you, would quietly reshape what she was able to see, that she would start to see what the group saw rather than what was actually there. She also believed she had a particular calling to remain at the boundary, to stand where the faith ends and the world that doesn't share it begins, so that something could pass between them through her. Staying outside for Simone Weil was not failure, it was vocation. Here is what makes Simone Weil impossible to dismiss and impossible to entirely believe. If anyone had the right to stay outside on grounds of integrity, it's her. The case she makes is not convenient. It cost her enormously, practically, socially, spiritually. She died during the war in England, having refused to eat more than the ration available to people in occupied France. That is not the behavior of someone avoiding discomfort. And yet there is a version of her argument that is genuine, and there is a version of it that functions as the most sophisticated possible reason never to commit to anything. The person who always finds one more reason to examine the question before acting is not always being honest. Sometimes they're using honesty as shelter. I am not saying Simone Weil was doing that. I genuinely don't know. I don't think she knew entirely. And that uncertainty is in itself part of what her life demonstrates. The line between heroic intellectual integrity and the permanent deferral of something too costly to face. That line is not always visible, even from inside. What I do know is this. She is a figure who breaks the seeker-non-seeker distinction open because she was undeniably a seeker by any definition. She was given something by her own account, and she chose deliberately not to enter it. What do you do with that? So here is the moral problem this episode was always building towards. The Pope's distinction, seeker and non-seeker, is generous. It makes room for Rocco. It makes room for Augustine across 30 years of running. It probably makes room for most of the people listening to this. But it has edges, and those edges matter. What the tradition has generally said is something like this. The person who never genuinely encountered the question cannot be held responsible for the gap. But the person who encountered it clearly, who was given something real and then turned away from it, is in a different position. Not condemned, but in a different position. Simone Weil was given something by her own account, and she stayed where she was. Camus encountered the question as seriously as any philosopher of his era and concluded silence. Are those the same thing? Is Camus a non seeker? Is Weil? Or is the category of seeker something that can be performed, dressed up, made to look like rigor, while actually functioning as a way of never having to arrive? That question has no clean answer, but I think it's the real one. I want to be careful about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying the people who haven't arrived at faith are simply being cowardly. Some of the most courageous intellectual lives in history ended without belief. Camus is the clearest example. His moral seriousness was not a consolidation prize for someone who couldn't manage faith. It was the real thing. And I'm not saying the church teaches that doubt damns you. It doesn't. The tradition has always held that a person who genuinely follows their conscience is not outside grace, whatever the label. What I'm saying is narrower than any of that. Whether doubt is a failure depends entirely on what the doubt is doing. Is it motion, pressure that keeps you moving towards something? Or has it become the destination? Those are different things, and the difference isn't always visible, even from the inside. Rocco sent his poem to the Pope. My drama is God. My restlessness is God. He didn't claim belief, he claimed restlessness, and the Pope told him that might already be the beginning of it. Augustine's heart was restless for 30 years before anything resolved. The restlessness, looking back, was the seeking. The seeking was already the relationship, even when he couldn't see it. Camus felt the restlessness too, named it more precisely, perhaps, than almost anyone. He just reached a different conclusion about what it pointed at. Simone Weil felt something more than restlessness. She described contact and stayed on the threshold anyway, for reasons she believed were honest, and that may have been. All four of them looked hard. None of them looked away. That, at minimum, is what the Pope is asking for. Is doubt a failure? The honest answer, the one I keep arriving at, is that it depends on a question only you can answer about yourself. Is your doubt moving? Is it the thing that gets you outside at dawn or sends you back to the same question you thought you'd finished with? Then no, that's not failure. That might be the closest thing to faith that your particular life currently allows. But if your doubt has become furniture, something settled and familiar that you return to not because the question is still alive, but because the question being alive is less frightening than the answer, then something harder needs to be asked. Simone Weil stood on the threshold her entire adult life and called it a vocation. Maybe it was. But the threshold for some people is just where they've decided to live, and the difference between those two things is not always visible from the outside. It might not be visible from the inside either.